Well, good afternoon. I'm John Sangenberger, Head of Alumni Relations at the Tepper School, and we're glad to have you joining us for our Tepper Alumni panel today, our roundtable discussion on COVID-19's impact on the retail industry. It's been an incredible season, retail season with so many upheavals because of COVID-19. And we just got through Black Friday and Cyber Monday and record sales online and lots of things to discuss today. So we're very happy to have you joining us. We will be getting started now, and I'll give an opportunity to share a few insights before I introduce our panelists. First, we want to thank you for all of those of you who have supported us at the Tepper School with our annual Giving Day. CMU Giving Day was Tuesday. We had an amazing response from our community. It was a record for CMU in both total dollars, over $1.5 million that were given that day, and in the number of gifts. And Tepper, very proud to say, led all the schools on Carnegie Mellon's campus in our gifts. But we want to say, if you didn't make your year-end gift yet, you have an opportunity between now and December 31st. So I want to encourage you to make your gift online. You can choose any fund you'd like to. There's a whole variety of ones on there. We just encourage you to think about the Lifelong Learning Fund as well. So on behalf of all of our students, faculty, staff, and alumni, we want to thank you for your support. Our next upcoming webinar, our second one for the month of December, is going to be another roundtable discussion on big tech and the call for antitrust regulation, something that's been in the news in Congress. It's been an issue that's been bubbling up for a number of years, and we've got a great panel headed by Professor Tim Derdinger, who is Associate Professor of Marketing and Strategy. We have Anna Lenhardt, who is a CIT alum, who's going to actually working as a Congressional Innovation Fellow, working with the House Judiciary Committee on Antitrust. So that'll be interesting. And two great professors from Carnegie Mellon, Michael Shamos from CIT, outstanding professor, and also leads in their artificial intelligence and innovation. As well as Param Singh, who's our Carnegie Mellon Professor of Business Technologies at Tepper. So going to be a great one. Mark your calendars now for it. We're going to have a lively discussion in just 2 weeks. But today, let me introduce our faculty host. I'm always delighted to introduce particularly our star faculty that we have at the Tepper School who have been joining us in the last number of years. 5 years ago, we were honored to have Dokyun Lee, we call him DK, join us. He's Assistant Professor of Business Analytics at the Tepper School. He's really in artificial intelligence, machine learning in business, and really looking at the consumer side of it. He did his undergraduate work in computer science at Columbia. And then he also went on to hold his degree from Yale and then his PhD from the Wharton School. So he comes to us with a great background academically. He's also got an industry background with tech startups, with BlackRock, with Thomson Reuters. So he's got some greats there. If you go to his webpage, you'll see that he's received the Best Paper Award from Information Systems Research and Informs. But you'll also see dozens of other citations for him and the research grants that he's received. So he comes to us highly acclaimed in the academic field as a young professor. He's also the co-lead of CMU's AI Retail and Service Design Initiative called CARES. They held a roundtable, virtual roundtable in June of 2020. I encourage you to go to that, see the video of that. It was another outstanding one on it. But so happy to have DK with us today. Now let me introduce our alumni panelists. We have Lee Delaney joining us who's president and CEO of BJ's Wholesale Club. He joined BJ's in 2016 as executive vice president, then was the chief growth officer. We went up to president and CEO there. Prior to that, he spent a long career, a 20-year career with Bain, heading their America's consumer practice. And before Bain, he was with Electronic Data Systems and Deloitte. He comes to us from the University of Massachusetts and proudly his Tepper MBA or MSIA in 1996. Next is Richard Knoll. He's our senior alum in this field, and we're very excited to have him with us. He's the former chairman and head of the board of directors for Hanes Brands. He was also executive chairman and chief executive officer since 2006. So he's got a great career in that. And prior to Hanes Brand, he was with the Sara Lee Corporation, where he worked for 14 years, leading a lot of management positions, president and chief operating officer of their branded apparel, the chief executive officer of Sara Lee Bakery Group, and led the turnaround of several of their corporations. He currently serves also as the board for on the board for Reynolds Consumer Products, was a director also of the board of Carter's. He previously served as the director of Fresh Market from 2011 to 2016. He comes to us from the University of Pennsylvania, where he got his undergrad degree, and then his MSIA, his MBA from the Tepper School, and began his career as a systems programmer. So we've got really appreciate having his valuable insights for us today. And last but not least on our panel today, another class of 1996 alum is the CFO of Hudson Bay Company since August of 2016, Ed Record. He's also the former CFO at JCPenney. Before that, he served leadership roles with JCPenney. And then before that, he was the chief operating officer for Stage Stores and their chief financial officer. But he's had a real career in retail with major national retailers, Kohl's, Belk. He began his career with Kaufman's, as many of you in Pittsburgh will know, the part of the May department store. He holds his BA in economics from Princeton, and then came to Tepper. He also has a son attending his first year at the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon University, and also joining the football team. So happy to have our outstanding lineup of panelists today. I'm going to invite them now to turn on their cameras and join us for our great discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for the excellent introduction, and welcome everyone. It's an honor to be a moderator to the leaders of the retail. So we all have been dealing with pandemic for almost a year now. And now with the holiday shopping seasons already in full gear, as well as the wave of unfortunate new COVID cases, we thought it would be the right time for a renewed discussion on how the pandemic has impacted our economy, specifically in the retail industry. We also want to discuss the near-term and long-term futures of the retail with discussion about the path forward. But before we go on to do that, I want to hear more about their background from the panelists. So let's do that. So let's start with Rich. Rich, you have a very impressive career in retail industry, leading to being a chairman and CEO of Hanes brand, a leading marketer of apparel brands around the world. Can you give us a brief overview of your career and what you see as the most significant changes in retail over your career?
Well, thanks, DK. I've spent virtually my entire career in and around consumer businesses, running food businesses, as well as the CEO at Hanes in the apparel business. And pretty much all of my board services is centered around grocery, food, and consumer. And I've seen two major changes in the retail space over my career. The first one goes back to the 80s. And if you remember, back then, both general merchandise and grocery stores were all centered around small mom and pop firms with maybe a couple of stores in a city or small regional firms. And then you had this emergence of mass, first by Kmart, and then leapfrog by Walmart and Target and others, who offered just great, compelling value for consumers with a lot more convenience. And that led to 2 decades of share growth. And then interestingly, right in the middle of my career, I saw that major shift again with online, where I think the trends are very similar, where you've got people that are able to give better convenience and compelling value to consumers. And we're right in the middle of, I think, a multi-decade trend now with online, with the fundamental underpinnings pretty much the same. So it's been a pretty exciting career to see 2 big changes like this.
Thank you. Let's go with Lee. Lee, you began the consulting field leading Bain's America consumer product practice. How did you make the transition to your current role, and what was the biggest adjustment for you going from being a consultant to being in a C-suite?
Yeah, sure. I left Tepper in 1996 to go directly to Bain & Company, thinking I would stay for a couple of years, and ended up staying for 20. And I absolutely loved that job, and I love that company. It's a fascinating place to work. You get to engage in some of the biggest topics across a variety of industries with a number of leading players. But every consultant at some point wonders if they were in the operating role and had the ultimate accountability, if they'd be successful. And I definitely got that bug a few years ago and decided to make a switch to industry, joining the team at BJ's Wholesale, a little bit more than 4 years ago. And it is a pretty different job in a lot of ways. Some things are the same. You're set with interesting problems, and it's a very challenging, intellectually stimulating environment. But some things are really different, and I found them to be quite interesting. One is the issues that you face today are going to be with you, and the decisions you make, you see play out over a long period of time. If you have a bad consulting project, you move on to the next one. If you make bad decisions at an operating role, you tend to live with those. Two, it's definitely a more stressful role in a lot of ways because there's a scorecard that is visible. But I think it's really quite exciting because you have a team and a real chance to win in the market and really redefine markets and the way the company operates. And I found that to be really quite enjoyable.
Excellent. Thank you. Ed, so you've been leading financials of big retailers like Kaufman's, Kohl's, Belk, JCPenney, and most recently Hudson Bay Company, which owns and operates Saks Fifth Avenue, Guild Group, and so on. Why did you choose retail for a career, and what has kept you engaged over your career?
Hey, DK. When I got out of Princeton, it was, I guess, somewhat happenstance. I ended up in retail. It was an opportunity, and I knew May Company had a great training program, and it seemed interesting. And so it was in Pittsburgh with Kaufman, so I was able to get back home. And but once I got into it, and in between there, I went to Tepper and came out of Tepper and stayed in the retail industry. I just loved it. So incredibly fast paced for retail and so dynamic. And I'm sure we're going to talk today about all the changes you're seeing, but retail's been dynamic forever, and it probably is accelerating that change like it is everywhere. But it's just great to go in every day and be faced with new challenges. And as Lee said, you get a scorecard every day, if you're winning or losing every day when you walk in the door. And I really enjoy that as well. It's not, working on projects and, having to wait, 6 months, 12 months, 3 years to see the results. You see it every day and how the customer is judging you. So I've just, it's been an interesting career, and I've just been in retail the whole time. And I'm sure there's other places that are better or as interesting, but I've just had a great time in it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for excellent overview of your career. And yeah, I do agree that retail is very fast-paced. You have to deal with multiple fronts like consumers, supply chains, as well as organizational issues. I think there are a lot of challenges. Most recently, the pandemic has hit it really hard, more so, and mostly, for the retailers who has to adapt to these changes and drastic change in consumer behavior. So let's start addressing some of these current state of retail under pandemic. So what developing trend, this is a question for everyone, what developing trend in retail have been accelerated by COVID-19 pandemic? And what were the most surprising or dramatic changes in consumer behavior you have witnessed? For example, I find myself trying different brands that I would never have tried because the original brand that I was shopping for is out of stock or they're just not there, right? So Rich, can we start with you?
Sure. I think of one that really comes to mind, and I think the best way to illustrate it, though, is with a little bit of a story, if you don't mind me telling. So in the year 2000, I started doing two practices that I've been doing since. And the first one is I had businesses report to me that were around the world, Mexico, Australia, and places. And I started using video conference in lieu of actually physically going to meetings. And the technology was pretty close to what it is today. Not quite as good, but it was better than you might think. And I thought for sure within the decade, it would dramatically impact how business people traveled and interacted with each other. But the adoption was extremely slow. And then on March 15th, 2020, 2 billion people learned how to Zoom overnight. And now it's become a pervasive part of the culture, and it's never going to go back. In the same year, in 2000, our local grocery store, Lowe's Food, started to allow you to order online and pick up your groceries curbside a few hours later. My wife and I have now been doing it for 20 years. Local competitors started to do it. And I thought for sure again that this was so much more convenient. Within a decade, it would be the way that everybody would be shopping. But the adoption rate was just painstakingly slow, and retailers weren't getting on board. And then again, on March 15th, 2020, everybody in the United States wanted to order online and pick up curbside. And I think this is the biggest change that's going to come out of COVID-19 for creative destruction on the grocery retailing side, that you're going to see it accelerate much faster than we saw general merchandise or apparel or some of the other categories shift from solely bricks and mortar to online. I think you're going to see this really, really happen fast.
Thank you. Lee?
Sure. Maybe I'll pick up a little bit where Rich left off. So I took over as CEO of BJ's on February 1st of this year, and was quickly faced with the pandemic, roughly a month later. So I've been holding on ever since. And, one of the profound changes that we saw was the increased adoption of online shopping for groceries. So, our company is roughly a $15 billion retailer, and 85% of that is groceries, which hadn't had huge online adoption. But for us, it was really the cancellation of the NBA season. When that happened, people started to take things seriously, and demand for our business overall, but demand for omni services just went through the roof. And it's continued all throughout the year. So we just released our Q3 earnings a couple of weeks ago, when we saw a doubling of our digital services, and that's been the trend throughout the year. And I think it's just changed the way consumers think about grocery shopping. And I think it'll be sticky, because once you set up your basket and the regular items you buy online, it becomes pretty easy to continue to shop that way. And then interestingly, kind of related to that point is, for us anyways, the speed of decision-making in retail has really accelerated. And I think that is, in some ways, the corollary to increased omni demand. The world seems like it's changing at an ever-accelerating pace. And, throughout the pandemic, if we normally make a dozen big decisions in a month or a quarter, it feels like we're making them in a week now. And we're just needing to move so much quicker to keep up with safety concerns and varied demands and digital services. And that's exciting. I think, grocery retail in particular has been a little bit slow to change, but that pace of change is really, really picking up.
Thank you. Let's go with Ed.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Rich and Lee said. I think, talking about it more from the fashion department store industry, obviously the digital side of the business continued to accelerate, and was, that's where all the growth in the industry is coming, and the stores are, at best case flat or usually trending down. And then when the pandemic hit, we actually closed all of our stores, I think March 16th or 17th, both Canada and the US. And so everything went online. But even as the stores reopened, that acceleration to digital, just while it was always an underlying trend and was always going to get there, just, really took off. And so, I think COVID just helped us get, further down the line on that digital migration. It probably accelerated us 2 to 3 years in 2 to 3 months. And, there's other changes. We continue to see customer behaviors. There's a lot less, returns for whatever reason happening online now. And, what people are buying, there's a lot less women's fashion, but more beauty and more home, and things like that are continuing to change with the pandemic, as you would expect, or people are staying home and, doing all their meetings by Zoom. But I think the real change was, it accelerated the digital migration, probably by multiple years, at a very quick pace.
Yes, even I am starting to just utilize things that I, for some reason, did not use before, but out of necessity, realize it's now more convenient, like ordering curbside and so on and so forth, as mentioned by all the panelists. So Lee, this is a question for you. So what are the trends that you're seeing at BJ's and across industry with warehouse companies like Costco, Sam's Club, et cetera? And what about other industries like home improvements?
Sure. I think we've been relatively fortunate throughout the pandemic. Earlier on, as a large grocery retailer, we were deemed essential, and so didn't wrestle with some of the challenges of having closed stores and liquidity and solvency. But we wrestled a lot with the challenges of operating in a world where people didn't quite understand how to deal with COVID, which had its own challenges. And I think for warehouse stores in general, there have just been record levels of sales and increases in membership, which has been really quite exciting for us. And if you think about the position we occupy in the industry, we're selling bulk groceries at the lowest possible price. And it turns out in a pandemic, particularly one with associated economic anxiety, being the low price seller of bulk groceries is a pretty good position to be in. And so you've seen for us in Costco and Sam's, some of the strongest record levels of growth we've ever seen. As an example of that, we've added roughly 3 years of members so far this year. And so just really incredible demand. There's also a whole host of knock-on effects for the wholesale industry, which are interesting. An example of that is real estate availability. With the pressure the pandemic is putting on some other retailers, it creates opportunities for companies like ours to expand, which is quite exciting.
Yes, indeed. Interesting, yeah. So Ed, this is a question for you. The national department chains have been negatively impacted, as opposed to these large warehouse companies. So how would you characterize the market trend for this part of the industry? Department chains, a lot of them have been, going bankrupt. How will the consolidation of retailers alter the competitive landscape? And what do you anticipate in the future in this particular subsector?
Yeah, I think, again, just like the, COVID accelerated the migration to digital, I think department stores have obviously been challenged for many, many years. And I think COVID has just accelerated that challenge, right? You see Penny's going under, Lord & Taylor going under, a lot of the mall players going under. I think you're going to continue to see consolidation. I think the industry is going to continue to be challenged. I think, it's hard. It's an aggregator of brands. And, now that the cost of entry, particularly around digital, continues to come down, and, the cost to the consumer about shopping brand by brand, where you used to have to get in your car and drive around town to shop different brands, and you could go into one store and see them all there. Now you can still sit on your couch and go to any brand you want. What department stores really mean and their value proposition continues to change. And I think the stores that can do that well and, handle that migration will continue to be around. And I think, you're going to continue to see the Macy's and the Kohl's survive. But some of the smaller players, I think, are going to be challenged. And I think, particularly when you look at luxury continues to do well. But when you look at luxury, as for Saks Fifth Avenue, its biggest competitor isn't Neiman Marcus, it's all the brands it's carry in their individual shops. So there continues to be work to try and figure out that relationship between department store and brand. And I think you'll continue to see that change over time as, regardless of COVID. I think that was an issue before and will continue to be an issue afterwards.
Thank you. Rich, I had a specific question for you in terms of how pandemic has been affecting the apparel brands. I read some funny articles about how the shopping for, tops and clothes exploded, while the bottom, the pants and things like that, nobody is shopping anymore. And other than these sort of obvious changes, do you see any particular changes in shopping behavior and apparel industry due to this pandemic? And what are some maybe opportunities there?
So, DK, I'm glad you didn't ask everybody that's on camera to stand up to see what kind of bottoms they're wearing, but I've got jeans on, everybody, so I'm good. There's been some challenges that have happened in the apparel industry through the pandemic, and I think you're seeing some short-term shifts like the ones that you're talking about that are happening, but I don't see them as pervasive, long-term shifts that are going to be there and stay around for a long period of time. They're going to come and go as people start to get out or go back to the office or go different places. I think the single biggest change is what we've all been talking about, which is channels, online accelerating, sort of where at that, at the exponential part of the curve where it felt much more linear before. And in all of this, there's a big question that I know has been sort of rumbling around is the pandemic and online either favoring brands or favoring private label, and how's that all going to play out? And I'm a firm believer that if you're a great brand and you offer a consumer compelling value, they're gonna want to buy you, and the brands you're going to see that are strong are going to continue to stay strong. Those that are weak are going to get absorbed by retailers' private label, and I do see that as something that's been accelerated in apparel, probably in other categories as well, but clearly in the apparel industry. But at the end of the day, as I've been focused on the consumer, and if you sign something and you give, by putting your name on it, your brand name on it, and you give a consumer a great product at a great price, and you give it to them in a convenient manner, they're just going to keep coming back year after year, and you'll have a sound, healthy business.
Thank you. I think what Rich, you just said, there is a panelist, I'm just jumping around here. Venki Shankar asked, this is related to what you were saying about the brands. So with retailer getting closer to the shopper through curbside pickup, delivery, etc., do you anticipate store brands to become powerful? So this is open question for everyone. How would retailers leverage this trend, and what should national brands do to counter this? Should they go direct to consumer? So I can see, if there is room for the retailers to swap any sort of a replaceable brands, I can see this happening, the fight between the national brand and the store-only brand.
Yeah, I might jump in there. I think it will, likely vary a bit depending on the particular industry that you're in. So, for us, own brands end up being a pretty important initiative and a place where we've put a lot of focus. Simply because you can offer a relatively comparable good at about a 20% price discount to our customers and see about 1,000 basis points higher margin in our particular business. And so to a retailer, it ends up being a really good consumer value at advantaged economics. But to Rich's point, brands almost always have the upper hand, because if you have a great product with a great brand and you invest behind that, that will always work for consumers. And so our business is still 80% brand driven, and I think the economics of that are quite compelling. The curbside element actually goes hand in hand with something I know, DK, is important to you, which is the application of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. And I think people are really just starting to experiment with this, with Amazon perhaps leading the way, where you can mine people's purchase history, understand their likelihood and prevalence to switch to own brands, and then offer targeted suggestions. And I think that's something that really should scare some of the branded consumer goods companies, particularly as they see an increase in online shopping, because that force of using analytics and data to suggest substitutes, particularly where there's an economic advantage for the retailers to go one way or another, is a potentially big shift over the course of the next few years.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on one of the things you're saying, though, is that a company and an organization can only have so many areas of expertise. And so if you're a retailer, you've got to be really good at understanding how that consumer wants to cross shop. You've got to be fabulous at logistics. And but if you're a manufacturer or you're a brand, you've got to have particular expertise in that product category. And I've seen really retailers try and be experts in 20,000 different products, but they can't. At the end of the day, innovation generally comes from the brand because they have more intimate knowledge about how you construct the product, and they're always going to be a step ahead. And so retailers can compete in that commodity segment where there is no distinction or innovation. But when it comes down to it, if you've got a good brand, it means they know their product category. They know exactly the different features that a consumer wants out of that particular product category. And it's hard for a retailer to be good at logistics, to be good at mining that consumer data, and be good on 20,000 different products. So I'm always see a role for a brand. And I do think the other part of your question, DK, was, well, should brands be selling direct to consumers? And the answer is absolutely. In my career, I've always believed in omnipresence. So we believe that we wanted our products every single place a consumer might want to buy them, whether it was from BJ's or whether it was from a Walmart or whether it was from a department store such as Macy's, whether it was online with Amazon or direct from us. And we wanted to make sure our products were out there to make it as convenient as possible, to let the consumer decide where they want to shop. And so I do believe brands should be out there, not necessarily competing directly with their retailers. Competing on price is not a brand's never going to be able to compete with Lee at BJ's on price because of his cost structure. But you've got to provide that convenience for consumers, and you'll do well.
Yeah, I would just add that, Lee was speaking to the food industry. If you take that to the fashion industry, I think those economics that he laid out are pretty consistent. Maybe the profit margins quite aren't as rich as in the food, but still pretty, better for the retailer than they are over the brand. But Rich is right. I think it's really challenging. I think retailers can do well at the basic segment, but to have a consistent point of view across the private label and to really lead in fashion, I think that's really challenging for people. So I think you're always going to see brands probably being leaders in the fashion side where, private brands will make up more of the basic commodity type brands. And, as I talked about earlier on luxury, our biggest competitors are the brands themselves. They are out there in full force, particularly on the web. Obviously, different brands have different philosophies around brick and mortar stores. Some have gone heavier, some have gone lighter, but they're all out there on the web and it's all available direct to the consumer. So, where from Rich's point of view, that's a good thing. From a department store, we don't like to see that, but I think it's pretty clear that, those are our main competitors are the brands themselves.
Thank you. Very insightful. The next question, again, is for everyone. I think this is very interesting. And I think as a leading industry experts and practitioner, you guys are set to answer this question well. So what are some delayed effects of COVID-19 shutdown that will be triggered in the near future? Something that we haven't seen, but you expect?
I can start. I don't think it's surprising that, you're obviously going to see a lot more store closings. I think the store closings you saw so far this year, at least the permanently announced ones, are pretty much on pace with prior years. But I think, once we get past this into 2021 and the recovery starts, I think you're going to see a lot more store closures and even mall closures. And again, I don't think this is something because of the pandemic. I think it's just been accelerated by the pandemic. But I think, beyond that, I think people are really looking at their supply chains, how they can be way more efficient in their supply chains. And, some of the pitfalls that could happen coming out of the pandemic have really highlighted some of the weaknesses people see in their supply chains. In addition to that, I know, we're trying to really look at our pricing models and how do we get to be more just in time, both on the product and in the markdowns we're taking. I think the department stores had gotten to the point where they were shipping stuff incredibly early to have it, pre-season. And then by the time you get in season, taking those markdowns and has really been hurting the profitability. And we're really looking at how do you reimagine that, we don't need to bring holiday goods in July anymore. There's probably opportunity to sell more ready to wear now. And I think we're really using this pandemic as an opportunity to try and rethink that and go back to maybe where we were 30 years ago.
I'll pick up on DK, a slight variation of your question, not a delayed trend, but one that I think is going to continue. And the data I'm seeing is saying that meals at home are going to stay stronger for the long term. And, the family dinner was in decline for 40 years and is now turned up. And it looks like that's going to have staying power. 20-somethings that have moved out were able to just, go out to restaurants or get takeout and do all those things and didn't really have to learn how to cook. Well, now everybody's been forced to cook. And while there's some of them say, I can't wait for restaurants to open again because I never want to cook again. Actually, what we're seeing is the data saying is that no, they actually like to do some meals at home and do some grocery shopping, especially if it's convenient. I can order online, pick up curbside, and then I can cook my stuff right away that night. So we see those trends as being around for a long period of time. And I think there's retailers that are going to really benefit from that.
Great. Lee?
Go ahead, DK.
Oh, no, I was saying you should.
Well, I think, I agree with those comments. I do think it's interesting as we stare into our member data. We do see younger families buying less prepared foods and more foods that require cooking. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over time. Because I do think, there's probably a generation, maybe two, that didn't quite have the cooking skills that their parents had. And people have had to learn to adapt and to cook. And so I think, for us, that will be a long-term positive. The thing that I worry about tied to the pandemic is that the economic dislocation that is potentially out there. And there's obviously been just a remarkably resilient economy so far. Our ability to pivot and change supply chains and adapt to Zoom has really been incredible. But I do think there's an underlying worry about just the degree of unemployment, the degree to which some industries have been meaningfully changed. And then, there's some one-time things that hopefully we can wrestle with as a country, like the pending eviction moratorium ending, which could further extend the pain. And that to me is something that we do worry about is, are we able to wrestle with some of the underlying consumer economic distress and rebuild the strength of the economy? And hopefully we'll be able to do that.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question that's more motivated from the academic perspective. By the way, just a little bit of plug. Since late last year, I was involved in creating this initiative initially called CMU AI Retail and Service Design Initiative, but we are now rebranding as Enable with the AI in the middle. And this is with Paul Pangaro, professor at HCI and academic liaison, Office of Sponsored Research at CS, Computer Science, George Darakos and Chris Kessel. And something that we want to do here is provide a community for retailers to come together and talk about solutions, AI solutions, service design changes. And here's a question that I'm curious. So what are some unexpected problems that retailers face, whether it's about consumer behavior or supply chains, which might lack even the starting place because of this new problem, and calling for new innovation and research streams such that retailers can collaborate with researchers to find new solutions. I'm interested in knowing problems that baffle both industry leaders and researchers, if there are such a thing. Something that might spark research collaboration.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and start. It's fascinating to watch over the course of the last couple of years for us, anyways, the emergence of artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning. And so this has long been an area of fascination for me. So my undergrad degrees are in computer science and math, and I went to Tepper. So I have a kind of a deep appreciation for science-based application and computer science, and that to me is just has consistently been a profound source of change and innovation in the industry. What's interesting is just the broad application of artificial intelligence that we're seeing, and so there's an element of it in mining consumer data to understand what people would like, how you can incent them to do different things, how you can find people who look like them and market to them. We're finding it in all things customer service related to be helpful, to understand what issues are people having, what are the underlying root causes, how we might design better mechanisms. And that's really quite exciting. We're seeing it kind of take leaps and bounds in online commerce, and really just understanding what do you serve up to people and how do you incent them. The one place where we frankly have seen just a little bit less of it is in the supply chain, and that has been a challenge this year overall, with just the volatility in supply chains, where there is not a predictable pattern. Things have been moving quite a bit. We've been plagued by out of stocks and vendor shortages, and that to me is just a major source of challenge. It's a huge part of our cost bar, in an area where it would seem like there would be opportunity for further advancement. And that might just be from our point of view, but we're seeing more kind of consumer facing data mining applications, and less on the heart of the supply chain systems.
Thank you.
Yeah, DK, I'd follow up and just reiterate Lee's comments about where AI can really help is by mining that consumer data. What I want, if my grocery store has a 20-year history on me, they should be able to start to predict what I'm going to need and start to pre-populate my shopping cart, rather than me have to go through. And how do you make it, better and easier for me to actually buy from you? And if you do that, then I'll shift 100% of share of wallet to you instead of splitting it across multiple retailers. But the big area that I think is right is and I'm going to say technology in general, just not AI specific, is the supply chain for food is much more complicated than for general merchandise. So there's, Lee knows this well. There's three supply chains bringing product to his store. There's a temperature agnostic, a refrigerated, and a frozen. Amazon's figured out temperature agnostic. They can ship stuff when temperature doesn't matter. But refrigerated and frozen's a totally different deal. And I think in technology that can figure out how to drive down supply chain costs and local picking costs, so that you can operate, lots of nodes around the country. I don't know how many grocery stores in the U.S. there are. I used to know that number, and Lee can probably tell me what that number is. But there's tens of thousands, and if you can figure out how to use technology to drive that cost of distribution down, let the consumer get that last mile, use robotics and things like that to, pick. Somebody has talked about a technology where you can convert an old drugstore into a picking location to service customers with grocery or pre-assembled meals that you cook at home. And that's an area for creative destruction, I think, that you're going to see evolve over the next decade.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with all of that. I think if you look at it from a department store or fashion retailer, the temperature doesn't matter to us, but the challenges in that industry are really, you've got stores that are less productive every year, and how do you open up that inventory to your .com, which is growing every year, right? So you still have to have the showroom in these stores, but how do you make the back office more productive, and how do you open up that inventory? And I think that's a place that's I think a lot are really looking at that now and challenged there, and I think those that can manage to be able to still present a full assortment, but be able to utilize that for .com in an efficient way, are going to be the ones that win going forward. But of course, AI, from a .com, given all the data, I mean, exactly, every way along the funnel where they are and where they drop out and what they're looking at and how long they're looking at it. So, you can mine all of that data from a .com standpoint, and that's, underway. And I think people understand that today. But I do think being able to apply it to supply chain is where people are going to be able to differentiate themselves as they move forward, at least in the, the brick and mortar space.
Thank you. So we don't have much time remaining, and I don't want to dominate the question. So for all the panelists, you can go to Q&A if you want to answer a specific question. I would encourage you to do so. A lot of the questions have been pre-submitted, and while you're going through this Q&A, I would like to also ask, this was a pre-submitted question, what sort of AI techniques or solutions that you thought were, going to be effective, but turns out it wasn't effective at all due to this pandemic. For example, I can see all these predictive models that assume that there is no distribution change or data set shift. A lot of that is now not so effective, and if you need to bring in some human intuition and outside of context knowledge to either fix this. Have you figured out a ways to do so? If not, or what are you trying to look for? Things like that. And then feel free to look at the questions asked by the attendees.
Right, I can jump in a little bit as people are scanning the list. So, we're a big believer in personalization and giving people marketing that's relevant, offers that are relevant. And, throughout the pandemic, that's been challenging. It's challenging because people's behavior has changed pretty meaningfully. And so mining historic data looks a little bit different now as people are eating more at home. But it's also a real challenge from a supply chain standpoint because we're having a hard time keeping more or less anything in stock. And so knowing what to offer someone depends on understanding inventory availability. And so that becomes a challenge. The more structural thing about personalization and in some ways broader artificial intelligence is there's always an economic ecosystem that is connected. So for us, that often relies on our vendor partners, where we'll work with them to design programs and find funding. And we always get the question of, how do you know this recommendation is right? And it's, there's an artificial intelligence engine and, machine learning that drives this output. And you get a lot of questions of, but how do we know? And is it cannibalistic? Is it pulling forward volume? And figuring out ways to partner with others in your ecosystem when artificial intelligence can feel a bit like a black box is a pretty important part of the puzzle that's often left to the retailers themselves to wrestle with.
Thank you. Yeah, Rich and Ed, any comments?
No, I mean, I think there's lots of things that the pandemic has changed, right? Particularly as you look at even from a retailer, just making sure you're, understanding what categories are going to grow and which ones are shrinking and where you want to put your inventory and dollars behind. And obviously that has changed dramatically. And any of the analysis that we do to recognize that, or the predictive analysis to help us with that, has been kind of thrown out the window. And it's really left up to the buyers to work through as they continue to manage their businesses.
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Well, you had said to scan the list for some of the Q&A that's there. So I've seen a question or two. If you want me to turn my attention to that, or if you had something for me to answer, I'll do that first.
Yes, please. No, go ahead.
So there was one here for apparel and home business that aren't essential like grocery. What are our thoughts on store traffic over the next few years? Will it increase or decrease, and what do local stores need to do to make them worth the trip? And in my answer there, and I'd love to hear Ed's thoughts and Lee's thoughts as well, is I don't think anybody has any idea. It was really interesting seeing coming out of the in the early summer when some of the stores started to open up, there was actually a surge in traffic. It was sort of like pent up demand in some of our categories where people did go shopping and so on and so forth. But by the end of the summer coming, it started to slow back down. So it's really unclear what patterns from going to a store are going to emerge over the next couple of years. And I think that's where retailers are going to need to be poised to take advantage of anything that comes their way. And if traffic goes back to some more historical levels, if they need to change their model, or if it pulls back even further. But that's one of the things that you're not going to be able to forecast. So you just got to be able to turn on a dime.
Yeah, I'll really reinforce what Rich just said. One of the big topics of discussion for us is when the pandemic ends, how does consumer behavior change? And what's sticky, like at-home cooking, and what changes pretty meaningfully. So do you have people rushing back together to socialize and have large gatherings? Do you have a massive resurgence in travel? And for us, we've seen pretty meaningful swings in categories, and so some of them expected, like sales of tires and luggage, are meaningfully off as people drive less and travel less. Some comically so, like sales of gums and mints and deodorants have been historically weak this year. And the real question though is what happens. And I think to Rich's point, nobody really knows. And the implication where I started in some of my initial remarks around agility, I think, is really important. And so for the kind of organizationally minded folks and particularly professors at Tepper, that question of how do you increase agility for businesses that historically have been relatively deliberate in their approaches to things ends up being a really big deal. How do you, for us, buy really close to demand? How do you shift suppliers, sources of supply, different geographic footprints, and how do you become meaningfully more nimble? Is something that we're wrestling with every day.
Great. Ed, do you have?
No, I mean, I agree with everything Lee and Rich said. I think, the challenge is a lot of these decisions are multi-year decisions, right? And particularly, as you're looking at signing leases, getting out of leases, building stores or closing stores, the real challenge is trying to understand where the consumer is going to be. And I think the pandemic, again, it's going to be really interesting as things come out. 2021, assuming we see a vaccine, and Q1, could be like gangbusters. I see people think that people haven't bought really clothes for a year, and they're going to go out and want all new outfits as they start socializing and going back into the office. But again, the hangover from COVID could still be going on all the way through Christmas of next year. So it's really a crapshoot on how we're going to come out of this and what the underlying trends will look like when we do.
Thank you for all the insightful comments. I do want to also point out that this unfortunate event, pandemic, has there are some, benefits in terms of getting new sets of data. So, for example, as Rich, Ed, and Lee, you all mentioned, there have been some consumer behavior that just was not catching on, which was accelerated. And for example, those who use curbside, those who shop online for particular products, you do have all their data, but they're biased, right? It's a selected sample who choose to take that technology and use it. But due to pandemic, now more different demographics and population has no choice but to use these technologies. And so you can get more quality data to see where the differences lie. And I think that's an opportunity. For example, now that more people are shopping online for things like clothing, you could see where there are some behavioral differences in terms of returns. Are there type of clothes that, are more prone to returns? You can mine these things so that there is maybe a little discrepancy between online and offline. Of course, there are things that you can't really fix because it's online, offline. but I guess the new data set might offer that opportunity. And with that, I think we only have 4 minutes left, and I was told to ask this last question for all panelists, and I want to give enough time for this. So the last question for all panelists is an important reason that you chose to do an MBA was to become part of a network of colleagues and friends like the Tepper Alumni Network. And what does being part of this network mean to you, especially times of major disruption like those that we are living through right now? And what advice can you give the more junior members of our network regarding how it can help them get through these times and how they can help others do the same? Let's go with, again, Rich, Lee, and Ed.
I think one of the things I've really valued is my relationships with people that I met back in CMU in the 80s, and my continued relationship with the school over all these decades. And I really do think it provides tremendous benefits. And so I urge everybody to continue doing it. In terms of the junior members, the one piece of advice I always give for people that are coming out of MBA school or newly out of MBA school. And there's this constant battle in your career to focus on, a specialty or broadening your career. And in my experience and seeing lots of different people, you want to always do both. And the sequence is what's important. You need to specialize early in your career and then pick the right time for you. The timing varies, but then to broaden. If you specialize forever, you won't do as well. And if you broaden too soon, I've seen that derail a lot of careers. And so that's my other parting advice to the more junior people taking part.
Sure. I'm so appreciative of my experience with Tepper for a few reasons. One is it really just armed me with a way to think about business problems and really problems in general that has been incredibly useful and powerful for me over the course of the last 25 years. It's hard to believe it's been 25 years, but just the foundation of how do you think about complicated business problems, particularly from an analytic and data-driven way. And that's been really helpful. Similar to Rich, the network of friends and colleagues that I developed has been really important. Some of my, closest lifelong friends now come from the Tepper School. And frankly, I would encourage junior alumni to keep up that network of friends, but engage with the school. And that's an area where I too feel like I could have done a better job. And so, very happy to participate in forums like this, and really feel honored to be asked to join and to speak to a group of Tepper folks. So thank you for having me. I'm not sure if I'll have another chance to say it, but I hope everyone stays happy and safe and well over the course of the next few months.
Yeah, I'll close this out, I guess. I think as I look at it, I've got multiple networks, right? Where you have your undergrad, you have your graduate school friends and colleagues, and then you've got the people that you've worked with, over however long your career has been. And, I guess the one piece of advice I would give is that I always find that people are incredibly willing to be helpful and to share. And every time I've come across something that is new to me, but probably not new to other people, reaching out to those folks and picking their brains on how they're dealing with this problem or how they dealt with that problem has, always been rewarding to me, whether it's, my Carnegie Mellon friends and, business associates or other networks I have, is that don't be afraid to reach out. I've always found people are surprisingly helpful to share their experience with you, to give you advice, and to let you know how they've gone through it. And, and obviously having such distinguished alum coming out of Carnegie Mellon, you have such a rich network there that you can reach out to, and it's a great benefit.
Thank you, all the panelists, for spending your valuable time with us. I really enjoyed this. It was very insightful. Thank you, attendees. And lastly, but not least, thank you, John and Janice, for organizing this wonderful event. John.
You're on mute, John.
We're glad to have such amazing alumni to share their insights with us. We had a rich pool, I should say, of alumni who are CFOs and C-level leaders at some of the major retailers and online stores. So it was great to have this select group with us today. And I think we could have gone on for another hour or two just talking about all the trends and challenges there. But thank you so much for your support of the school and for this network, and for our alumni who have joined us today. We want to continue to encourage you to stay connected, to reach out to alumni, our panelists included, to make those kind of connections. And let's have a very strong presence in supporting one another through these challenging times. And I wish all of you a happy holiday season as we look ahead. And as we've all said, stay safe and stay healthy, and hope to see you on our webinar in just 2 weeks.